All right, do we begin now? Fabulous. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're excited to have you here for such a hopeful event in a world of just bad news. Tonight, we're honoring the 30 years of Huckleberry Youth Programs. They've been providing valuable adolescent mental health services. I'm Jenny DeBevick, your moderator tonight. I produce the podcast Smells Like Teen Parent, and I'm an academic consultant and school counselor down at San Bruno Park School District. Tonight, we have an outstanding cast of panelists, and I'm going to briefly introduce them, though this is really just the tip of the iceberg as to their expertise and contributions to the field of mental health. Starting off, we have featuring Stephanie Alvarez, who is Huckleberry's mental health manager up in Marin County. Stephanie is a bilingual psychotherapist, and she makes social equity a priority. Stephanie dedicates herself to working with adolescents and families through psychotherapy. Next on the list, we have Kisai Henriquez, who is our program manager of Huckleberry Project Ready, which stands for Reconnecting, Educating, and Achieving Dreams for Youth. Ready is Huckleberry's school-based juvenile justice prevention program. And Kisai specializes in working with youth and their families who have been or are currently in systems. And then finally, Douglas Stiles, who is our renowned executive director of Huckleberry Youth Programs. Doug brings in over 20 years of experience as a licensed psychotherapist, and he has a background in trauma and has developed transitional housing program for youth and increased mental health services for parents of young children. So Douglas, turning it over to you real quick, do you have a few items that you'd like to share with us?
I definitely do. Thank you, Jenny, for introducing us all and for being with us tonight moderating. So Huckleberry for over or nearly 55 years, over 50 years, between 50 and 55 years, for a long time has been a Bay Area component of the healing community with young people and their families. And Huckleberry is a nonprofit, so this is our little spiel here at the beginning of tonight's program. Tonight, we honored the 30th anniversary of our adolescent health services, and all donations made tonight to Huckleberry Youth Programs will be matched up to $50,000 by the Quest Foundation. You can make a 100% tax-deductible donation via text by texting HYP to 41444. Or you can make an online donation at our website, www.huckleberryyouth.org. And we could not provide adolescent mental health services to thousands of young people and their families every year without the generous support of our community of donors and the generosity of our event sponsors. Tonight's event sponsors are the Carolyn and Peter Friedman Foundation, Diane Tressenfeld and Ed Waldrop, Sutter Health, Union Bank, the Golden State Warriors, Betsy and Joel Hausman, Kaiser Permanente, Leon Metz, the Rotary Club of Tiburon Sunset, and Sabina Sheikh. Thank you so much, all of our sponsors and all of our donors. And Jenny, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Doug. And thanks to all of you in advance for your generous contributions. You know, as you know, the need is greater than ever, and together we can make a significant difference. So onward now to the discussion part of our webinar. Doug, give us a brief history of Huckleberry's adolescent health services.
Sure. So I'm going to go way back to the 60s when Huckleberry started. I said, Huckleberry started in 1967 during the Summer of Love. And at that time, if you were a young person, you could be arrested for doing things that were not illegal if you were an adult. And they called these status offendings. These are like being a runaway, being truant, and actually not obeying your parents was one of the status offenses that could get you in trouble. Huckleberry started to work against this and say, this doesn't make much sense. If people are running away, there may be more things going on than just that they're a bad person. And so if we fast forward to our health services, which were developed in the early 90s, it was a completely different time than the 60s and a very different time than where we are today. As many of you probably know, the 90s, we were learning a lot more about HIV/AIDS. At that time in the early 90s, adolescent suicide rate was peaking at the most it had been since we started collecting records. Thankfully, it's dropped since then, but it really was a difficult time for adolescents. And one of the things that I think is important in terms of this look back at the history of adolescent mental health is that at that time, if you had serious mental health issues and you were an adolescent, there were services for you. There were psychiatrists, there were facilities that would be able to treat you. But if you had milder symptoms that often manifested in behaviors, you were seen as a strange, odd, unusual person and kind of put aside. There was still a lot of stigma about what it meant to be different. And maybe some of that different was having mental health systems. What we've seen in the last 30 years, since then, since we started our clinic in Haight-Ashbury and then our expansion into Marin County with our clinic up there, we've actually seen those suicide rates drop, but they're starting to increase in the last decade. For young females, in fact, the suicide rate has nearly doubled in the last year among women in the adolescent era. And we now know that probably 1 in 5 to 1 in 7 young people has a diagnosable mental health issue. Many of those are undiagnosed and untreated. And we know in the last 10, 15 years, depression in young people has grown almost by 50%. So a lot of things have happened over the last 30 years. Well, I said the last 50 years. But one of the big things that I want to put a pin on that I hope we talk a lot about tonight is that today, adolescents are talking about how they feel. Today, they're talking about the challenges that they're having. They're talking about it mostly with each other, but sometimes they can approach an adult and sometimes they can get the services that they need. But the stigma among adolescents is not nearly as strong as it was in the last 30 years. So we talk about hope. That's one thing that I think is hopeful, and that people can actually get some of the help that they need.
Great. Thank you, Doug, for providing that timeline. At this point, I'd love to just open up our discussion to our other panelists about what you're both seeing the youth dealing with now that maybe we weren't seeing in the 90s or even the early 2000s. Kisai, will you get us started?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Doug, for that overview as well. One of the things I'll highlight that's really obvious is social media. Yeah, I know my generation, I think, was that generation transitioning into what media looks like now. But I think now young people are accessing information at a faster rate and are becoming more aware of political things going on, right? Things happening in their community as well, and being able to share the information, take in that information, and really feeling more empowered and inspired to live in their truths. So even though we can have a lot of criticisms about social media, I'll just highlight that is a difference, and there is some positive things about it as well.
Thanks, Kisai. Stephanie, do you want to add to this?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Buenas tardes a todos. What I wanted to highlight a bit was the idea of what we've seen actually in the last 2 years. I mean, with COVID, so much happened, so much uncertainty. I feel like we were asking so much of our youth in the schools and the system of, one day we're going to be doing distance learning for 2 weeks, and then never mind, we're back in person, then never mind, we're back online. And so much uncertainty in the spaces that our youth were dealing with, so much stress, and not even, talking about in families what was going on for a lot of our youth, the economic impact that the COVID had. And so a lot of our youth had to step into roles of leaders, not only in their community, but at home. So that itself in the last 2 years has brought on a lot for youth that they're dealing with, and still now. And with that is tied to just the academic pressures. We're seeing much more stress factors in our youth nowadays, especially with COVID. There was a loss of learning that happened in that time. And so we saw a lot of our youth having, to take community college classes to make up for a class they couldn't take during the year. They had to navigate the virtual world. That in itself was really stressful for a lot of our youth, and teaching their younger siblings how to use virtual learning and their parents on top of that. So I want to highlight those two things as being something that our youth have been dealing with till the day. But also throughout this panel, you'll hear me also say that I am super hopeful too about our youth and moving forward.
Yeah, just keep reminding us that we have the hope factor. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore, highlight, boldface, scream out that the pandemic, the people dying from COVID, as Stephanie was saying, the opening and closing and remote and in person, the mask, no mask, get your vaccine. Oh, you're too young, you can't, but you have to be in it. Just the plethora of things that have happened in the last 2 years have seriously impacted me. And you can only imagine how they're impacting young people who in this adolescent phase are really developing who they are going to be as people. I mean, there's 2 years of their life that has just been taken away and run through the ringer and turned upside down and then tried to put back together really quickly. I can't underscore enough the challenges that we're seeing people come in with that are directly related to all the things that happened during the pandemic.
Yeah, and that's sort of a great segue into kind of, we're looking at that big picture of the challenges with social media and COVID, the increase in suicide, academic pressure, gender identity. And now maybe we can kind of hone in on some of the mental health issues and behaviors that you all are seeing specifically at Huckleberry Youth Programs in the last couple of years. Stephanie, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, so I think for us, what we've been seeing is a lot of, because of the pandemic, we've been seeing a lot of our youth lack positive coping skills. We've seen a lot of our youth, because of the isolation that happened, more anxiety and depression in our youth, and a lot of them not going to school, deciding to kind of stay home since, being put back into the space and the community might be too overwhelming to some of our youth. And so we're seeing that and just, the lack of boundaries as well, kind of almost, especially our younger students, we're having to almost teach them how to be students again, teach them those skills since, for the last 2 years, they were at home in their rooms and just isolated. So I definitely say we've seen more of that, of the anxiety and depression in our youth coming back even more than there was before. But I do want to say also that I have noticed with this, it almost like opened eyes for a lot of our students, and they've become more aware of their surroundings and what's going on just on a bigger platform. We saw, a lot of students through social media, kind of create campaigns and rise up to causes that they were seeing play, on the news. And so I also feel that they came back with more awareness. And as we know in the mental health field, awareness is the first step to change. So I'm seeing that from my students and seeing them also just show up and be just vulnerable in spaces with us leaves me super hopeful for what's to come.
Yeah. And, that piece about them being more aware of what's happening with them. And also, I was wondering, Kisai, if you can add to that, just maybe talking about the well-being of adults and caregivers and how that's relating to mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to comment as well that at least in the schools, what we're noticing is like young people really advocating and looking for therapy or support groups or spaces where they could really open up and share. And I think that's new. And also there's not enough services to meet that need. So I just wanted to comment on that. And yeah, I think it's super, super, super important, almost essential and critical that adults that do caretaking with young people, that help support them in the multitude of ways that we do. And also, of course, as parents and caregivers and guardians, how important it is that we take care of ourselves, that we get our healing done, that we get support with our mental health, and how the more we take care of ourselves and kind of center our well-being, the more kind of care and love and reducing any harm or hurt that we can bring to young people and communities will happen. So yeah, I think that's super, super important.
It's like we're having this collective healing globally
Yes.
and locally. And on that sort of on the local level, I'm wondering how you're both seeing what you're seeing in Marin versus San Francisco, maybe the similarities and differences between these two communities, and what you're seeing, you know, across the Bay in terms of what youth are struggling with. Who wants to start? Kisai, you want to start us off?
Sure. So yeah, I think for my experience, and I've worked both in Marin County and also in San Francisco, but I think here in the city, there's a wealth of resources. There's just so much access to things that young people have and families have, and it's still not enough. Whereas Marin, I feel like Huckleberry Youth Programs is one of the few agencies that have youth-specific or family-specific services for young people in Marin County. And that I think also a lot of the services in Marin are neighborhood-specific or the city-specific. Whereas I think in San Francisco, even though we're a small city and county, there's services in every neighborhood, you know, for the most part and all over. I think also with public transportation in San Francisco is a lot easier, or walking and biking. Whereas in Marin, it's like you almost have to have a car. Things are more rural and kind of spread out. And so hence, you know, reconnecting to services being more neighborhood based. So you kind of stick to whatever is available to in your neighborhood if you don't have a car to access other places. And then the last thing I guess I would say is where this is kind of commonalities is that there's extreme high incomes. So people with really, really high incomes in both, I think, our cities and counties, and people with really low incomes as well. And that it often feels like there's this racial and ethnic disparity and like segregation with both of our counties and cities. Even though, of course, it looks different, it feels different in both.
Yeah, and then as we head up into the more rural areas of Marin, Stephanie, what are you seeing up there?
Yeah, thank you, Kisai, for that perspective of the differences. And I think, unfortunately, that is very much true till the day of what we're seeing here at Marin. We are seeing a lot of schools reach out to give presentations for substance use. So our work right now in the present moment has been doing more outreach and intervention for substance use here in the county. And then we have amazing partners here in Marin that also help us in more of the direct work with substance use as well. And so I think even though that is very much true, we are trying our best to collaborate with each other, with the schools, to almost model that for our students, that we can't do it alone. And so as agencies, we are trying to meet students where they're at. So they're in the classroom. So we're going to go in there in the classrooms and give them presentations. So when they are ready to, you know, become aware of what's going on in their lives, they know exactly where to go and find us or find resources at school. So we're doing that. And also I did want to touch a little bit about, yes, like Marin unfortunately has, you know, it's a lot of, even in the district, there's so many districts. So the separation that's happening, transportation, very much true with the division. But going back to what I started the conversation of just being hopeful, I do feel that our students are starting to recognize that and ask for change. And I think one of the examples of that is how our Nuestra Salud program came about, which is a new program we've just been piloting, which is a peer health education program for newcomer students who are Spanish speaking here in Marin County. And so what we do with this program is we train youth to then go and give this information out in the community. And so that program came about because a young person came to us and some friends and said, hey, why are we not in leadership spaces at our schools? Just because we speak Spanish doesn't mean we don't have something to offer. And so we're like, you're right, let's do something about this. So it was through them that then we amplified their voices and took it to the school and try to collaborate. And so there we go. And then we started the Nuestra Salud program. And currently we have 13 students in one cohort and 16 students in the second cohort. And so in total, we have 29 students participating. And even though 29 might not seem like a huge number, for us, it is, because these are newcomer students, and a lot of them, I would say about 90% of them have actually been here for less than a year in this country. So these students are having to navigate, having to learn a new language, having to reunify with a family member. They're having to process trauma in their home country, the trauma of coming here. A lot of them spend time in detention centers, and then just coming here, the trauma of, sometimes encountering racism and, having to navigate this new culture. And so that in itself, it's so much. And a lot of them also have families back home. So they also have to work. It's not an option for them. They have to work. And so to have these 29 youth in our program, be present with us and want to help their community to create more awareness about mental health and reproductive health has just been so inspiring. And so that gives me hope in that our youth are going to be the ones to lead the change here in Marin County and making sure that we're all in spaces we need to be.
Love it. So we're in schools, we're outside of schools, we're working with families, we're working with youth, we're working with a variety of cultures in our programs. And we've sort of identified some of the major changes that you are all seeing in with mental health challenges and the resilience that we're seeing, which is remarkable. Maybe now we can turn a little bit towards talking about how the youth mental health approaches have evolved and changed over the last 3 decades. Doug, you mentioned that, you've been a psychotherapist forever. So do you want to talk about the interventions and approaches we now use in these modern times?
Sure. It's a paradox. It feels like forever, but not that long also. So, but I think there's so many paradoxes around this. We were talking about social media, and I was thinking, 30 years ago, I don't think I even had a pager. There were pagers available, but no smartphones, maybe some people have those big old cell phones. So there's a way in which we're more connected today, but there's a way in which we're more disconnected today as well. If people are relying on their technology to connect with people, it's a different type of connection than what we would like. And there's an alienation that happens with that as well. So there's a way in which we're closer and further away from each other at the same time. And I think that pandemic has just kind of highlighted that dramatically. So one of the things that Huckleberry has done over the last 3 decades since we started this is to really pay attention to some of those trends and changes that have been happening. And in the last couple of years, probably the last decade or so, we've really zeroed in and focused on trauma and thinking about the trauma experiences that all of us have that may not be combat. They may not be like the severe things that people think of when you think of trauma. And I was thinking back and preparing for this back in 30 years ago when I was in school and studying. I was working on a study that looked at combat veterans, and we were looking at what they called fear potentiated trauma. And the essence of that is that the people we were studying were afraid that they were going to enter into a traumatic event, but they didn't. No traumatic event happened. However, the outcomes for them in terms of their experiences and the symptoms that they then acquired were exactly the same as those people who had the traumatic event. So when we think forward to the pandemic, people died, but people may have been afraid that they were going to die or that their parents were going to die. And just having that imagination be activated is as if it actually happened in terms of their physiological and emotional and biological response. So what Huckleberry's done over the last decade, coming full circle to where I started, is that we've seen trauma as a given for many people coming in. We did some research early on when we were looking at this and found that over 90% of the people that came into our services, especially our mental health services, identified having at least one major traumatic event in their life. And over 80% were saying that they had 3 or more major traumatic events. That's significant. That's not an exception, that's the norm. And so if we start thinking that people coming in are more likely than not going to have some kind of trauma history, and therefore a trauma reaction of some kind, which is the natural reaction to that, and we start from there, we're going to be much more successful in reaching them. And all of that starts with the engagement and the encounter, which is why I was talking about this technology thing. The human encounter is the healing component to trauma. And it takes getting to know somebody. It takes getting to know what they enjoy, what they like, what music they listen to, what foods do they have at home, what celebrations do their family go to. Those are the things that tie people back to themselves and heal traumas that happen. So we've adapted our service to become trauma informed, looking at trauma as not the exception, but the norm of people coming in. Did I see somebody else raise a hand there? Nope, keep on going.
Yeah. Well, do we want to talk about also, one piece I love about the trauma-informed approach, especially, we're working with youth and in schools, is that it takes that like the shame and the bad kid piece that was sort of, we hear those labels all the time, the bad kids, and it just, it changes it, it turns it on its side, and then we bring in a restorative justice lens also into the way that we work with youth. Maybe, Doug, you can keep going on the restorative justice, but I know that we also have Kisai, you work with restorative justice, and Stephanie, I imagine you do as well. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, and then I'll pass it on to Kisai,
Yeah.
because she works much more in this area, is exactly what you're saying. Few young people want to or enjoy behaving badly or against the norms. Very few people are in their young years are criminals. They may be involved in behaviors or activities that society says you should not do this, and there's reasons for that, and there's safety issues around that. But there's very few people who are like, yeah, this is going to be my life. What happens is that whether it's trauma, whether it's systems that have failed people, whether it's undiagnosed learning differences, that people go to school and become frustrated and don't know what to do with that frustration, and then act out in some way. There's all kinds of ways in which young people are engaging in behaviors that we may not like. As I tell people, they're behaviors that I did when I was a young kid as well. And if we approach it as saying, oh, this is a normal part of development, and what we want to do is connect you with an adult, connect you with an engaging adult, you can build a trusting relationship so you can explore and move through those stages of natural adolescent development in a way that brings you out the other side a little bit healthier. So Kisai can talk a little bit about what we're doing in Project Ready and our other youth justice programs.
Yeah, I just need to take a breath. Yes, thank you, Doug. I think when we talk about restorative justice or even justice prevention type work, it's really about looking at young people and even their families as people, as humans, and not as problems that need to be fixed. And that we, just because maybe we have professional experience or degrees, that we can fix them or do something that they're unable to, because that's not the case at all. It's really about looking at people as humans, so being human-centered, being healing centered, meaning that, you know, or how I define it is like someone has the power within them to help themselves, right? And that, but we can't do that alone. And so we need to do that in community and do that in partnership and collaboration, and create safer spaces and braver spaces for that healing to happen, and or that exploration to happen. And I think through all of our programs, you know, with Project Ready, even with CARC and the kind of sub programs within CARC that are more restorative justice focused, is really about that, is again, just being that healing centered and human centered, and really having young people understand that even though we know it's normal for them to make mistakes and to hopefully learn from those, that their experience, or the decisions that they made don't just impact them, that they also impact their neighbor and people in their community. And having the opportunity to kind of break that up and understand what that means and how that really plays out is super important. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say. I can go on and on, but I don't want to take up too much space.
Oh, that piece about the family, right? That these aren't just children in isolation, but they're part of this larger organism. And the way that we think about how we even help with family therapy, how we approach family therapy. I'm curious, maybe Stephanie, do you want to remark on, like, I'm sort of like fishing for the word attachment-based therapy here, and what that means to all of you and how that influences your approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so important when a young person comes in and they want to have their family involved, and creating a healing space for them all. It's so important. I always kind of present it like, I'm here supporting you, whether it's at this office or at this school space, but also I want to make sure that you have someone in a space at home. And so who is that for you? What family member is your safe space there that you have, because we know it, when we're meeting one-on-one, it's an hour a week of a session, but also let's look at, the larger view of like what's going on and who are that positive support system in your life and who in your family, right? And so if necessary, we would love to engage and bring, parents into our sessions to heal that, whether that is something as, communication. Sometimes that is something that we see a lot with our young people and parents, right? Of like, how do we communicate and that both parties feel seen and heard? And so having that space in where they can come together, much like Kisai said, like having that safe space in the healing applies to with our family therapy too.
Yeah, the families they're healing at the same time. And I hear them, they're saying, I don't want my kid treated the way I was treated when I went through the system. And so we're helping the whole family changing that whole dynamic. Maybe we can add just another layer onto what we're sort of describing here, specifically about how Huckleberry Youth Programs has adapted intervention since our adolescent health services began, so that we're better supporting families and youth.
I'll start here just quickly. Just to follow up with what Stephanie was saying, is that many of our therapists are trained in the attachment-based family therapy, which is right in line with some of the trauma work that I've been talking about. It is the only empirically supported family therapy for adolescents with depression. And it's a nationally known model that we use. And it's based on exactly what we're talking about, is building a trusting relationship between parent and child, or guardian and child, or adult and child, is the way to heal and repair past challenges that have happened. And it's a communication-based model. It's a trust-based model. It gets people together to talk about the challenges and the hope and ways of moving forward. And we found that to be incredibly helpful. As I was saying at the very beginning, we see depression and anxiety increasing in the young people that we're working with. So to have a specific model to work with that has been a game changer.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks, everyone. And maybe, so we're talking about these conceptual ideas and what we're seeing. And maybe we could also just go in, and since we're all very practical people and many of us are raising adolescents, attending this webinar, and we know how humbling it is working with youth and raising them. Could we go around and just share some tips or mental health advice? I'd love to hear, what interventions are really working for you and where you're finding like aha moments with youth. Kisai, do you want to share?
Yeah, one of the things I like to encourage our parents and guardians to do, including us as staff, because sometimes we forget, is to really be curious with the young people. So when they do things, maybe that's like unwanted behavior, or maybe they're, not following the rules or expectations that we have for them, is really being curious about their experience, about the choices that they did make or didn't make, versus placing blame or judging them, or just shaming them for maybe the decisions that they did make. So I think being curious as much as possible is really, really, really helpful and powerful. And sometimes that means we have to take a little break and take some space before we can be curious, and that's okay. I think too, like getting outdoors with young people, with yourself, of course, too, either as a family or one-on-one as much as possible, because nature is very healing and very empowering to help kind of break down some barriers and really help open up space for dialogue and communication and just connection and trust. And then, like I kind of said earlier, is taking care of yourself. So the more that we take care of ourselves and our overall well-being, the more grounded, the more prepared we're going to be for the things that will come at us, especially as parents raising young people. And the last thing I would say is, you're not alone, that there is other parents going through the same thing. And there's people like us, adults, that do various roles, hold different roles and provide different services to help support and empower you as a parent or as a caregiver. And so really utilizing those resources and tapping into them as much as possible, whether that's within Huckleberry and or other, local agencies. And maybe Stephanie, well, I don't want to step on your toes, Jenny. But
No, go ahead, step on them. Stephanie, I was going to say, you've just had incredible success, bettering outcomes for youth. What are you noticing are effective approaches?
Yeah, I think for me, something I always like using with youth when I'm speaking to them, very much of what Kisai was reminding us of, being curious. And, when a young person comes to us with, something that happened, is remembering that our young people are much, much closer to the age of adults, so 18, than of a 5-year-old. So it's so important to treat them like adults, to give them that agency, to listen to them. So important. I think a lot of times, in society, we think, oh, young people, right? Or we try to dismiss what they have to say, but that is so far from the truth. I think we all need to remember that our young people are our future, and they are so close to being 18 than 5-year-olds. So let's treat them like that. Let's be curious with them. Let's ask questions. And also with that, being vulnerable with them. I think it's so important, as we're talking about being hopeful and, everything else. Let's model that for them. Let's show them that we can all do it together as a community. So, as a parent, as a caregiver, anyone working with youth, it's so important to, if a young person comes to us, we don't have to pretend that we know it all. We could say, I don't know, but let's go to the front office and see who they can connect us with at your school. Or let's, I've heard about a CBO in the community. Let's go give them a call and figure this out together. So being vulnerable and being okay with stepping back and asking questions. And I just want to definitely highlight what Kisai said about that you're not alone, utilizing those resources. So when that comes about, so important is as parent caregivers or people working with young people, let's also first remember to take care of ourselves. So let's also ourselves join support groups and do our healing as well. Let's not forget, because I think when working with young people, we tend to, be so devoted to our work that sometimes we forget about connecting with ourselves. So do not forget that. Don't forget to do your own healing first.
Yeah. So we say put on that oxygen mask first, right? What do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I was just gonna echo and amplify what Kisai and Stephanie said. And I was thinking of my own childhood and how my mother came to my music recitals, the theater pieces I was in, when I played sports would show up and sometimes be the only parent who was there watching the game. And it's about engagement. It's about getting to know your kid who's no longer 5 to 7, who's no longer 10. They're now becoming an adult. And so they are different than who they were. And they are emerging, getting to know them, engaging with them, being vulnerable with them, knowing what music they like, even if you're old like me and you don't understand it. Open up and try to understand it and see if they can understand the music that you like, and there can be a give and take. That's the shepherding the adolescent into adulthood. It's the long initiation process into adulthood where we're not treating we're not, as Stephanie said, they're very close to 18, they're very close to 20, much closer to that than they are to some of the younger years. And just finding ways that you can take a walk with them or engage with them, whatever that may look like. I'll also put a plug in here for Huckleberry has a parents group called Parents Turn. And it's a 6-week free, I don't want to say seminar. There's a lot of dialogue that happens in it. There's a lot of engagement that happens in it where people can learn and hear from other peer parents and caregivers about what it's like to parent an adolescent, because it's very different to parent an adolescent than it is a younger person. And the last thing I want to say is it is hard to be a parent. I have 2 kids who are incredibly wonderful and passionate and engaging artists in the world. And it is really, really challenging to be a parent. And excuse me. It is, yeah, there's reality right there.
Oh.
It is tough being a parent. It is really amazing when you can open up and engage with them and watch them grow and participate in your life and in their life. That's the fulfilling part of being a parent. It's difficult, and it can be this incredible, wonderful thing as well.
Yeah, it's like that shift between needing to control the child or help steer the little ones into respecting. I like, Stephanie, how you were saying, like, respecting their agency, and Kisai, how you were talking about being curious about and then noticing our own triggers so that we can really be present, because they almost don't care what we necessarily do with them. They just want us to show up and to be present in that space with them. I think now, well, first of all, thank you all for sharing, all of these great tips so that we adults can implement them right away and just go and show up for the kids. Maybe now we can also open up and see if there's any questions by the people who are attending. We're welcoming any thoughts that you have, or if you want more specific information. And maybe Doug, this is another opportunity for you to just share what is going to happen with these donations tonight that are flooding through the donation box.
Sure. Is this the time for my little, oh, I'm off mute. I thought I was still on mute. So this is the time that I get to do our Huckleberry commercial again. So just want to remind people that this is in celebration of our 30th anniversary of our adolescent health programs, which we are celebrating this entire year. This is one of many events. And if you donate to Huckleberry, your tax-free donation will be matched by the Quest Foundation up to $50,000. And so you can text HYP to 41444. Text HYP to 41444, or you can go to our website, www.huckleberryyouth.org.
Great. We'll have you repeat that one more time or 10 more times really, really fast. Heather, who is our technical director and our director of marketing events, is also going to be sharing resources with all of the people who attended tonight. Afterward, we're going to record this and send it out, load it up. So that will be in addition to all of this wonderful insight tonight. Maybe while the questions are just kind of lining up here, can we just go around and do a quick, like, what is the thing that you're most excited about right now in your work? Kisai, go ahead and start. Just do a quick round robin here.
Ooh, I'm excited about a lot of things, but one is finally we get to take the young people camping. So when they start our program in Project Ready, we do a 1 week basically orientation and community building, relationship building with them. So all the staff, along with all the kids that are entering our program. And so usually we do a different activity every day. And I've been wanting us to do a camping trip because I feel like with nature, like I mentioned, is a superpower tool to help people build community, build relationships, kind of help them explore their identity and all beautiful things. And of course, the year we were gonna do this, the pandemic hit. And so we have not been able to the past 2 years. And so this year we're gonna be doing that. So I'm super, super excited about taking young people camping and out to nature.
Oh my gosh, it's gonna be so amazing. How about you, Stephanie? What are you most excited about with your youth right now?
Yeah, I think going back to the newcomer program, we have Nuestra Salud, something I'm just so excited to continue growing just because we've seen the impact it's had already. We've seen get referrals from young people referring their friends into counseling. So just this whole idea of peer health education with mental health has been such an awesome thing because as we know, young people sometimes, even though as adults and parents, we tell them something, sometimes it doesn't stick until a peer tells them the same message. And we're here like, oh my goodness, I told you that. But, it's different coming from a peer. And so there's just something so amazing happening in that we're training these Spanish speaking newcomer students to go and give this message to other students. And so that just, warms my heart. And I'm so excited. And hopefully we keep on growing this into a bigger program so that we can keep on spreading the message and getting more support for our young people.
What a great program. And what about you, Doug? Excitement.
Yeah, what excites me, we at Huckleberry have the most unbelievably talented, incredible, passionate, creative staff in the world. And I think you see a little bit of that tonight with Kisai and Stephanie. And they're just a sample of an incredible group of people who are really doing the amazing work of moving our community to a healthier place. With some of the most challenging situations in the last 2 years, they continue to step up over and over and over again. And I don't know, I just have a big heart warmth for everybody on our staff and so happy to share them with the community tonight.
been such a joyful process just to see you all in action and learn about your individual expertise and how you work as an agency together. I think now, if there's no further questions or concerns, panelists, do you have any last things that you want to mention? Okay, well then I want to thank you everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, Kisai, Heather, and of course, Douglas. I'm Jenny DeBevic, and may you be safe and happy out there. Keep it hopeful and take care.